Olympic athletes going to Rio de Janeiro might come home with more than just a medal. Some public health officials are concerned about athletes, tourists, and members of the media getting bitten by mosquitoes carrying the Zika virus. Brazil has become the epicenter for this emerging disease, one that can cause birth defects by severely stunting the development of a baby's head. Although only about 20% of those exposed to the virus get sick, every one of those people becomes a carrier. 150 health professionals wrote this letter to the World Health Organization, taking the unprecedented step of asking the games either be postponed or moved, saying, quote, "The Brazilian strain of Zika harms health in ways that science has not observed before. An unnecessary risk is posed when 500,000 foreign tourists from all countries attend the games, potentially acquire the strain, and return home to places where it can become endemic." Regardless of your stance on this, all can agree Brazil's efforts to host the Summer Games have been a mess. Now the mayor of Rio is trying to manage expectations before everyone even arrives in August.
Don't come here expecting that everything will be, perfect. We live in a country that has economic crisis, a country with lots of inequality, with all the problems that we've seen concerning corruption, bribes, but the city will be much better than it was when we got the games.
And he's the mayor. So should the games go ahead as planned? Joining me to discuss are Dr. Holly Fernandez-Lynch, who signed the letter to the WHO. She's the executive director of the Petrie Flom Center. I pronounce it properly?
That's right.
For Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard University. Andrew Campbell is that pound-for-pound best rower in America who is planning on competing in Rio. Andrew, it's good to meet you, too. Thanks for being here. Why are these 150 of you? Why are you signing this thing? What's the issue?
Well, the issue is, as you just explained, we're really concerned about the risk of Zika to all of the tourists who are going to be arriving in Rio at the Games, all of the athletes who are going to be there, and then going back to their home countries, potentially having been exposed to this virus.
You're particularly concerned about home countries where the public health infrastructure is not strong enough to deal with these kinds of things.
That's exactly right. However, I would count the U.S. among those countries.
Why?
Because Congress won't fund Zika the way the CDC and the president have asked.
Well, speaking of CDC, let's listen to what the World Health Organization has said and what the CDC has said. Here's the WHO. Based on current assessment, canceling or changing the location of the 2016 Olympics will not significantly alter the international spread of Zika virus. And Dr. Tom Frieden, who obviously runs the CDC, there is no public health reason to cancel or delay the Olympics. What do the 150 of you know that these two incredibly prominent health organizations don't know?
So I think the problem here is that there's so little known about Zika, and their recommendations from the WHO and from the CDC are changing with quite a bit of frequency. So first they say have safe sex for 4 weeks after you've been potentially in a Zika affected area. That's recently been changed to 8 weeks. The recommendations are changing all the time. And so I think in this case, the 150 of us are saying it's much better to be safe than sorry.
Andrew, you're going, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any doubts about going at all, particularly when you hear what Holly's saying here? Does that cause you any concerns?
Yeah, so first I think it's important to put that 500,000 visitors to Rio for the Olympics number in context. Each year there are about 6.4 million tourist visits to Brazil, and Brazilians make about 9 million visits overseas themselves. So to target the Olympics specifically as a part of the response to Zika has merit, but maybe a bit overblown in the media. I think that the Olympics means so much to a lot of these athletes, and it's also enormously important economically to the people of Brazil that those features have to be taken into account when making any judgment about.
When you say a minute ago, it means so much to those athletes. You're one of those athletes, and my sense from afar is you're being put really between a rock and the proverbial hard place, meaning this is, I assume, a lifelong ambition. You are really good. I hope you can go back again, but this may be your only chance at this incredible thing. Wouldn't you be happier if the IOC said, listen, we don't want to screw this thing up either. Let's move them to Athens. Let's move them to something. You still get to compete, but you're not forced to make that decision.
Yeah, I'd be happy to compete anywhere, because what really makes the Olympics for me is just the ability to compete against these other athletes on a world stage.
I think that, I mean, it's right. Of course, we have to take account of these athletes who have worked often their entire lives to get where they are, and the economic impact on the location of the Olympics.
So what do you say to him when he's citing all these statistics saying that everything has risk?
Right, so
saying
that's
essentially
certainly
that
true.
the risk is minimal. What do you say to him?
So I agree that it's 500,000 people of potentially millions who are engaged in international travel. But in this context where there is an alternative of moving the games, not even necessarily postponing them, move them to London, for example, and give Rio the next Summer Olympics so that they can still benefit economically down the road. We have options here. There are choices. Those options are narrowing rapidly. We're 2 months away from the games. There's a lot of logistics that would have to go into that.
I think that 2 months is an important figure, and that plays a huge role in how realistic actually moving the games would be. And it's important to note too that we must take into account the cost of these types of proposals, moves. The SARS virus that we saw about 10 years ago or so cost Asia $40 billion in economic activity. So there are real costs associated with moves and travel bans and things of this nature.
It's pretty obvious you've done your research. I should say this is not something you're doing idly. But when you see people like Pau Gasol, a great basketball player, or Carmelo Anthony, Hope Solo, the great goalie for the Women's World Championship team, saying they're concerned, they're not even 100% convinced that they're going to go, even though they want to win just like you do. They want to compete for the... Does that give you pause at all, or you're just full steam ahead here?
I think certainly that, Zika is not optimal. It's definitely not a great situation, but I have faith in the World Health Organization and the CDC that they're providing the best possible guidance.
Can I tell you, I hope he's right, but we were talking to a guy who was your teacher. You told me, Art Kaplan, the great medical ethicist from NYU, earlier today on the radio, and he talked about the relationship between the IOC and the WHO. They both, and I said, is there something nefarious there? Because the IOC is, well, I know I'm not going to put you on the spot, it's about as corrupt as an organization gets. Is the WHO being bought here, or is that too extreme a characterization?
It may be too extreme, but we really have no idea because they are engaged in this relationship between the IOC and the WHO. There's a memorandum of understanding between them that has not been made public, despite calls for it to be made public.
Well, that sounds familiar to Bostonians.
We need more information here. And to be clear, the letter has just asked for some more concrete study of this issue, not necessarily
public
saying...
debate.
But
you do what? Your first choice is to get it moved or postponed, and at least have some public debate.
My first choice is moved for exactly the reasons that you've indicated. The athletes are ready to go, and postponement can be really damaging.
I don't mean to ruin your night here, but in addition to the Zika thing, you see these stories of the sewage-infested water that sailors are going to sail in, rowers are going to row in. What's your mindset about this thing, Andrew?
I, to be honest, try to put it out of mind because I've been preparing for this for a very long time and I'm going to compete. We've taken a lot of precautions as a U.S. team to try to mitigate the risk of getting sick. We've started taking probiotics to pad the gut to hopefully deal with any potential pathogens that might come with the water. I think
is that based on instructions from the USOC? They've reached out to you?
We work with team doctors from the USOC.
Oh, you do?
Yes,
okay.
yes. And it's also important to note that the food situation is very much something that the USOC has thought through. They've spent the last 3 years procuring very safe foods from sources that are verified, and we know that are less likely to get us sick than the local fare.
Not to mention there are about 17 million condoms, from what I understand. I'm serious that the IOC is like 400,000 or so. Very quickly, I should have started here. My apologies. The people who are at most risk here, obviously pregnant women have to be really careful. In fact, even I think the CDC is saying don't go anywhere if you're a pregnant woman in a Zika area. But also men who get this can sexually transmit the virus as well, potentially,
right,
can they
right.
not?
And so that's a serious concern in the Olympic Village, for one, and it's a serious concern as these men go home and potentially infect partners. And this is why I was saying before, the recommendations have changed for how long you're supposed to abstain from sex or engage in safe sex practices after you've been in a Zika-exposed area.
Holly, thank you so much. Really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having
And good
me.
luck. We hope you
Thank
win.
you so much.
Andrew,
Yeah,
stay safe,
Best of luck.
stay healthy.
Thank you.